This is the Critical Conversations podcast, a KPOV special project developed to feature unique perspectives and the courage it takes to go there, challenge mundane thought, and question the norm.
Finally, today we have you in, so welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Maybe you can let us all know who's Lindsey? What does Lindsey do? Give us a little background about yourself.
Yeah, well, it's so exciting to be here. And I used to be a kindergarten teacher at Silver Rail Elementary School. I absolutely loved it, really enjoyed working with kids in that way. And then about my fifth year of teaching, I was ready to start to support other teachers with their students socially and emotionally. So I went from teaching kindergarten and I transitioned over to working in my own business that I started with a curriculum called Positive Choices. So it's great to be able to support not just teachers, but also families. And I also get to help university students through OSU Cascades where I teach. So I just love working with students who are, grown up and in college and then younger kiddos and families alike. So I feel really grateful I get to work with people in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, what's coming up for me immediately is my background as a teacher.
Oh, so wow, that's great.
I taught for 10 years, and I found that teaching in the classroom, I was more interested in the social and emotional aspect of what was happening with the kids. So I left teaching, got my master's in counseling, and now I'm a therapist.
That is
so
really cool.
we have a similar, I mean, I did middle school though, but you were kindergarten. So, but
they're similar in a lot of ways.
They're both really immature. Okay, so what is the business that you created? What is it called?
So it's called Positive Choices, and it's spelled with a PAW because they're animal characters. The curriculum is geared towards younger kids, and the animal characters use their paws to do sign language to one another. And that's one of the reasons why it has that spelling. But as you mentioned, I also felt that passion for my students to succeed socially and emotionally. And especially in my second year of teaching, there was just a lot of students who had lagging skills behaviorally. And so this looked like, impulse control, emotion regulation. Some students would yell and run out of the room. I had another student, when he would get triggered, he would start to push chairs over and knock things down. And at that time, I felt like I didn't have the skills. I was totally taken off guard. I wasn't sure how to support them. So my journey became a really personal one. How do I help these kids? How do I equip myself with the skills to practice self-compassion and, support myself as well? Because I think there's a really important piece to being present with your own emotions as you experience that. I work with a lot of parents, and they say how hard that is personally when their child's having a hard time in Target, and maybe they're crying and flailing. And how do you hold space for yourself to calm and be present? And then you can allow your child to borrow your calm. And so that's such an important piece that I really want to give both parents and teachers permission to give themselves self-compassion and to really show up for themselves and then also be there for their children or their students. But that was a focus of mine. How do I help my kids thrive? And then how do I help myself as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I don't think a lot of people, this might have changed, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I got my teaching degree and went to grad school in the early 2000s. So a lot might have changed. But there wasn't enough emphasis on the psychology and how to respond to these really challenging emotional and how to be how do you discipline a class in a way? And I mean, discipline's maybe a harsh word, but how do you respond to a class in a way that keeps them, I mean, it might have changed, but it was really lacking then. So I don't think a lot of parents know that teachers actually don't always have the skill set in that realm that we think they do. Although we know that they're natural caregivers, right? You're just saying about as a caregiver, it's sort of sometimes hard to hold space for yourself.
Totally.
It's not natural to do that, right?
Or we feel selfish. A lot of teachers and parents feel selfish, like I shouldn't be holding space for myself. I just need to focus on my child. And that's important. But you mentioned something, you mentioned the word discipline. And I think when I say the word discipline at different trainings, I ask people to think about, what does that feel like to them? What do they visualize? Is it like a negative thing? Go sit in the corner.
Right.
What does that look like? And the root word really is to teach. Disciple, disciplina, that's like the origination of that. And so what are we teaching our children? And you mentioned such an important thing, and that's, how do we have boundaries for our class? Because we want to acknowledge their feelings, but we also want to maintain those boundaries and teach them the right thing to do. And so what I like to instill for my graduate students who are in their teaching program, I want to teach them how to have a productive approach to problem solving. So it's not, let's hold hands, kumbaya, talk about our feelings. We want to talk about our feelings, but we also want to have that accountability. And I talk about different forms of parenting and attachment, and that actually applies to teachers, because when we think about that authoritative parenting, that's high connection and responsiveness and warmth, but it's also high structure and boundaries. So we want to have both. And that's, as educators, very important too.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because in order to even like effectively know how to hold boundaries and problem solve, you really have to understand yourself and your own triggers and your own needs about what's happening. So you're not in a reactive mode. You're in a grounded, regulated mode, is kind of what you're talking about, is being regulated and co-regulating with a child, right? And so that's like, for some of us, that can take a lifetime. So how do you get people to that point of like really understanding that piece for themselves?
That's huge. One of the best things you can do is just take your hand. I invite people to do this at conferences or whatever I'm doing. I say, take your hand and place it on your heart and just take a deep breath in and let it out. And when you hug someone, you get that oxytocin, which is the hug drug, right? There's natural good chemicals that make your brain feel good. And then when you touch your chest, it's like you're giving yourself a hug. You release those neurotransmitters, so you're helping yourself feel better. So just pausing, maybe putting your hand on your heart, maybe not, and just breathing. I feel like that's always the right thing, is to breathe, because that helps you calm your nervous system. And then you want to respond rather than react. And I think that sometimes teachers and parents have this pressure, like, I want to be a good disciplinarian, I want to have boundaries. So we feel like we have to assign a consequence or teach in that moment when the child's just pushed someone or drawn on the walls with crayons. We feel like we have to teach right then. But the thing is that our children have to be ready to learn. They have to be calm, and their brain has to be settled, because if they're not, their brain's not in a learning state. So they're not going to be receptive to what we're trying to tell them. And likewise, if we're triggered and we're really mad or sad or frustrated, we're not ready to teach, because we want to be good teachers. We want to be good disciplinarians. So I love to give parents permission and teachers to pause and say, I can tell your brain's upset and we need to problem solve. And I'm going to wait until both of our brains are feeling better. Let's come back to this after recess, or when we get home after we put the groceries away. Then let's problem solve what happened in the toy aisle at Target, and let's talk about it then. Because if we try to solve the problem then, if we try to, have that, we want to be productive, but if we do it in that moment, sometimes we're not setting ourselves or our children up for success. So giving yourself permission to breathe, pause, and circle back.
And you're talking about really slowing it down too, right? Slow down the process. You're not going to lose your moment, to respond and to fix the situation, right? And something else you're making me think of is, and I already forgot it. Oh well,
happens to me all the time.
Oh yeah, I am a little tired today, so. But what I appreciate about this though is it's giving a whole new language around how we're responding to children and how we're responding to ourselves.
Totally. And
I'm curious, what are some? So you probably don't use the paw. Do you do the same language with the adults in college? Or do you use a different languaging with them?
Very similar languaging. So I do like to teach my graduate students sign language so that they can know how to redirect a child. So I actually learned how to use gestures that are based in American Sign Language because I had a student who was emerging in his verbal skills. And so I was told by a specialist, hey, you need to start signing with him because when you're just talking at him, he's not receiving that information. So I had to learn how to sign be safe and follow directions. I know listeners can't see me right now. I'm moving my body, but that was really powerful. So I do touch on the sign with my class, but I also really like to teach them practical strategies for what to do when a child is screaming or when someone knocks over a chair or someone's yelling hurtful words at someone else. So I like to kind of give them a reality check of these are things that you might see in the classroom.
Oh, you will. At some point.
I learned that I had a student tell me once, am I going to see all of this like on the first day? And I said, oh goodness, no, I hope not. I really hope not. But these are things that you might see, but really giving people the skills that they feel like they need to be successful. And one of which is just using that brain language. And it's like your brain can be the scapegoat. It's really nice. So we know that shame in the research is not correlated with good outcomes. In fact, it's really highly correlated with negative health outcomes like addiction, depression, suicide. And what is shame? Shame is the feeling that I am bad. And that's different than guilt. Guilt is the feeling that what I did was bad. So shame, focus on the self. Guilt is focus on the behavior. And so we want to start to use language that is promoting shame resilience. We don't want to say things that make kids feel like they're just bad humans who are not worthy of love and connection, but rather we want to be able to point out when you said this thing to Sarah, how did that make her feel? And starting to get to the root of what happened, giving them language. And then I had a student once at OSU ask me, she said, okay, so is our goal to guilt our students? Like that's what we want to be doing. And I was so grateful that she felt comfortable sharing that. And I said, you know, that doesn't sound right. So let me just think about it. Because if that's the one thing she gets out of my class is let's just guilt them. That was not what I wanted. And so I went back to the research, a lot of it based in Brene Brown's work. She's an incredible researcher, social psychologist, and she was able to, I learned in her data, is we want to have kids have empathy and accountability. And when they feel guilt, that can be the birthplace of students realizing, oh my gosh, my actions are affecting others in this way, empathy. And then accountability, we want kids to be a part of the solution. How do you want to make it better? Should we apologize? Should we write a sorry note to the custodian who has to stay late because you drew on the table with Sharpie and we can't clean it off? That happened a couple times when I was a teacher. But helping kids be a part of the solution is so important.
And Lindsey, you're giving us some great ideas, and I'm curious if we can talk a little bit more about when a child is in a dysregulated state. First of all, what does that look like? What does that mean? And how can we respond in a way that helps them?
Yes. So dysregulation, we have the concept of regulation. And when you're regulated, your brain is working optimally. That's when your child is really sweet and they're playing kindly with their sibling. Or in the classroom, that's when kids are following directions and doing what they're supposed to do. And then sometimes kids get triggered, as do adults. And someone says something unkind to them, or maybe they're just feeling really stressed out because you gave them a task that was beyond what their capacities are, maybe. And now their brain starts to feel upset. So we call that dysregulation. That's when there's those stress hormones like cortisol, and the brain's not, working optimally. And so what we can do in that moment is we can first, like you said, connect with yourself and acknowledge this is difficult. Kind of create that space for that. And then if you are ready to teach, if you're able to take a breath.
Can we talk about this really quick about the breath thing? Because I think that's a really good cue. If you can notice what your breathing is doing, it can really tell you what you're ready for.
Exactly.
If you're holding your breath, if you feel intense in your body, you really need to take that time to breathe deeply, to relax. Because it's literally the easiest, simplest, most powerful tool in our toolkit is our breath.
And it seems so simple, right? Like, how could it be that easy?
Right.
And it's really neat when you narrate that for either your class, your students, or your children, when you're able to say, you know what, my brain's feeling a little upset right now. I'm going to take a breath so my brain can feel better. I'm going to breathe. Do you want to breathe with me? Or maybe you're just modeling that. And another thing too is sometimes what the brain wants to do, what you want to do is just kind of walk away and remove yourself from the situation. But sometimes kids can see that and they can feel maybe a sense of abandonment, or I'm not good enough, or I'm making you walk away. So if we just say, hey, buddy, my brain's feeling upset right now. I need to take a break. I need to walk and help my brain feel better before we problem solve. Then kids know, okay, mom's fine. She just needs a little moment away from me. And then we'll come back together. Yeah. And so I think that's important to give yourself that space too, and just kind of keep them in on it. But you can really make the brain the scapegoat. You know, if a child messes up big time, they scratch someone because they were dysregulated, being able to say, you know what, your brain was really mixed up. You were so upset that you acted out and you scratched him. And that's not how you normally are, right? You're a really kind kid. You're awesome. And when your brain is in control, you are able to use your words and you do great. But this was a moment where your brain wasn't in control. So we're believing the best and we're helping them develop a positive sense of self.
I love that. So, okay, you're calm as an adult.
Yes.
So the first C was calm? I'm sorry.
Well, I think definitely calming yourself is awesome. Okay. And then there's something called the 3 C's.
Oh, okay.
And I started off
jumping ahead. Sorry.
A very important one, though. I think that's a prerequisite. Exactly. So the first one is to connect. So if we try to jump in, have you ever had it where you had a hard day? And
every day,
right?
what
I'm
day
describing
is
my life.
No.
Where you're talking to someone and you're saying how hard something is in your life. You're having a hard day, and have you ever had it where someone just tries to fix it, and they say, "Oh, well, that's because you're not doing this," or "You need to try this." But sometimes we just want to feel felt, right? That's what Dan Siegel says. And so to help someone feel felt is super simple. Just say, "I can tell you're upset. What's going on?" Or how are you feeling? And that's just connecting with them. And so you're able to say, I guess, what's an example that comes to mind for you of when you'd want to coach someone, be it a middle schooler or a personal child? Like, what's an example that would be helpful for us to illustrate the 3 C's?
I have an 8-year-old who's
Excellent.
Really just the sweetest little. I have a 12-year-old too, but I shouldn't exclude my older child. But she is learning how to really assert herself and step into her power. And here, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, she wanted to go to the store and get this treat. And I said, yes, we are going to get this treat, but we need to go to this place first. And maybe while we're there, they'll have this treat that you want. Let's just check.
Yeah.
Well, we went there and the treat wasn't there and she was really upset. So do you want to...
That's great.
Let's do it. There?
That's awesome.
I could tell you what I did, but I want you go from there. So she was in the store upset with me.
In the store upset. I think sometimes our go-to is to start to rationalize and say, well, we weren't sure that it was going to be here. And it's almost time we're going to go to another store and try to speak logically to their prefrontal cortex. That's the front part of their brain. That's the one that's, when you're calm. But when a child's upset, if you could say, I know that's really hard. Like, that totally stinks that it's not here. I get it, man. That's really difficult.
And I'll say, even if you do that, that doesn't always mean it's going to calm them down.
Totally. They might not say, oh, wow, I feel so felt. Thank you for connecting with me, right? Pick themselves up and now they're skipping to the car.
Right.
So even you just kind of make that quick connection. Let's do some breathing. And then when they're more calm, you can collaborate with them and say, okay, how do we want to solve this? But I think that just creating space for them, and Tina Payne Bryson's a great researcher. We were talking about her earlier, and she has a book called No Drama Discipline. It's amazing. And they say connect and redirect. So I know that's really hard. This is upsetting. Let's do some breathing together. And we're going to come back to this, or let's see if the next store has it. And sometimes we just need to be okay with the fact that our child might still be upset.
Yeah.
And they're crying, and our reaction is to want to make them stop crying. Like,
yes,
please, like
this. I'm going to say this is the drawback to this, because this research came out, 10, 15 years ago. Yes. And I've noticed, because I have children in that range, that a lot of the parents parent in this way to stop or control the behavior.
Exactly.
But a lot of times it doesn't do what they want it to do.
Yes.
And I loved that you said that you're not in control of the process. You're just present to the process.
Exactly.
Okay. So you're connecting, and then you're allowing them their process without, persuading it
Totally.
Right?
You're welcome to have those feelings.
Yeah.
Saying something like, it's totally okay to be upset. And it's not helpful to throw things off the shelves.
Yes.
I'm assuming that
There's
wasn't
a boundary.
the case.
No.
And it's not helpful to lay on the ground and yell, right? Like,
Right.
it's okay to be mad. You're saying yes to the child, but then you can say no or redirect the behavior.
Yeah.
Because, you see people, there's the different types of parenting. One is permissive, and that's really high on connection. Oh, sweetheart, I know you're upset, but then the structure's not there,
Yes.
right?
There's a lot of that. That's what I'm talking about.
That's where the child is kicking and screaming and knocking things over, and the parent's just standing there. So we do want to be able to have things like, I'm going to help you by taking the toy and putting up high, or whatever that looks like. But I think, and like you mentioned, sometimes what we want the fast fix.
Yeah.
We want the short-term behavioral change.
Because we are uncomfortable, right? In those moments, we feel terrified and uncomfortable, and we don't want to be in that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're looking around, and people are looking at us, and now we're thinking, what do people think of me? So I think with all of this, and it's so cool when I learned about your station, the Curiosity Lab, one of the best things I've read in the research is be curious.
Yeah.
Like, be curious. What can I learn in this moment? How can I help? But perfectionism, Brene Brown talks about perfectionism asks, what will they think?
Yeah.
And curiosity asks, what can I learn, or who can I help? And so if we start to feel ourselves feeling perfectionistic, what are people thinking about me around me? Then we're not going to be able to learn as much, right? We're not going to be able to focus on the human that's in front of us.
Yeah.
And one of the best things you can do, and I tell students this who get overwhelmed, one of the best things you can do is you can make a mistake.
Yeah.
Let's say you explode and you have a hard day and you don't act your best self. And you say, come on, I've told you this 5 times, or whatever it is. No recess for a month. And now you're the one who's punished as the teacher. You want them to get out. Taking recess away, definitely not best practice, but we know in the research now. That's just a side note. But when you make a mistake and you're able to come back and say, I am so sorry for how I acted in the store when I used a little bit louder of a voice. Normally, when my brain's in control, I like to use a calm and gentle voice with you. I like to problem solve and breathe, but my brain felt mixed up when you were yelling, and I was not kind with you. I'm sorry. And next time I am going to do my breathing. I am going to pause, and I'm going to try better next time. Yeah. I've talked to teachers and adults who say, I will not apologize to my child. No way. That's giving way too much power to them.
Wow.
And I see where they're coming from. But one of the things I like to encourage them to think about is when we model apologizing, that's what they do. Yeah. So if we're saying, hey, apologize to your brother, but you're not apologizing to them, you're not modeling what that looks like, it's not going to stick.
Yeah, you look like a hypocrite.
Exactly.
And by the time they're 12, they really understand when you have double standards or you're not holding true to your word. So yeah,
exactly. We don't have to be perfect. We can be present. That's another Tina Payne Bryson. We don't have to be perfect, but we can show up and have intentionality with how we're present. And again, one of the best things you can do is you mess up, you come back and say, I'm sorry. And that develops resilience in our children. And when you say, I'm sorry, I did this, my brain felt upset, then that's not saying, I'm sorry I did this because you're a bad kid, right? You're saying, hey, I felt upset, and that's my nervous system, right? Like, those are my triggers. It's so funny. I was learning more about a form of nonviolent communication. I don't know if you're familiar with NVC.
I am.
You probably are so familiar with it. But NVC is really one of the things I was listening to in a recent podcast is people can't make us feel certain ways.
Yes.
When I heard that, I thought, I do not agree with that. But the more I learned, I was trying to be open-minded, that one of the things they talk about in NVC is people's behaviors can be a catalyst to our feelings.
Yes.
Someone can borrow our car and crash it, and that's a catalyst for us feeling upset.
But even then, we have a range.
Yes.
You will feel differently than me. And
yes. If you hate that car and you really want the insurance and you can get, oh, great, awesome.
Yes.
So just realizing that different things in our environment, it's a catalyst for how we feel, and taking ownership and giving ourselves permission to be imperfect.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. That's just great advice and a lot to consider and think of. So to end, can you let us know, what's your website? Do you do consulting, counseling? How can we find you if we want to learn more?
Yes. So the best way to do it is to go to my website, which is Positive Choices. And again, that's with a PAW. So Positive Choices, when you're on the website, you can see a variety of things that I have. I have a YouTube channel with videos for kids and adults. I have a podcast. So that's called the Positive Choices Podcast. And every week I just hop on my podcast and I talk about these different ideas that we talked about today, but I expand them and go into depth. So free YouTube channel, free podcast. And then I do consulting and coaching, and all of that can be found on the website for those folks who are wanting to learn a little bit more. But
what if a parent wants to get you into their school to work with their teachers?
Yes. So that would, again, just go to the website, and at the bottom, you can fill out a form with a request for something like that. But I have the privilege of doing it in Central Oregon, and I was recently in Florida and different states doing this kind of thing. So it's something I really enjoy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I feel like we are going in the right place socially, emotionally, when, we have someone like you doing this groundwork in the schools and with the people who are working with the children. So thank you so much for being here and all that you do, Lindsey.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to a KPOV Critical Conversation. To hear more engaging interviews on important topics, please visit kpov.org/criticalconversations.